Right person, wrong time, until now. The first snowfall of winter descended upon the city like a whisper from the heavens, cloaking the world in a blanket of soft, pristine white. The streets, usually bustling with the relentless energy of daily life, now lay hushed beneath the delicate cover, their contours blurred and softened by the icy touch of snowflakes. Amid this tranquil scene, on the rooftop of a small, cozy book cafe nestled in a quiet neighborhood, Jiwoo stood alone, cradling a cup of coffee in his hands. The warmth seeped through his fingers, providing a comforting contrast to the sharp chill of the winter air that nipped at his face and ears. The scent of freshly brewed coffee mingled with the crisp, clean aroma of snow, a blend that evoked a strange sense of nostalgia. Winter had always carried a certain stillness, a quietude that invited reflection and stirred the memories Jiwoo often kept buried. He gazed out over the city, watching the snowflakes drift lazily from the sky, their descent unhurried and graceful. The sight triggered a familiar ache within him, a longing that had become as much a part of him as the air he breathed. Every winter, without fail, his thoughts would return to Yena. Yena had been a part of Jiwoo's life for as long as he could remember, a constant presence entwined with his memories and his heart. They had met when they were 17, and from the moment he first saw her, something inside him had shifted. He could still picture her as she had been back then. The brightness of her laughter, the way her eyes sparkled under the city lights, and the effortless grace with which she moved through the world. She had been sunlight and warmth, a beacon in the often gray and uncertain landscape of his life. But Yena had never been his. From the very beginning, she belonged to Minho. Minho was Jiwoo's best friend, more like a brother than a friend. They had grown up together, navigating the trials and triumphs of youth side by side. When Minho and Yena had started dating, Jiwoo had been happy for them, or at least, he had tried to be. He had told himself that his feelings for Yena didn't matter, that they were nothing more than a passing infatuation. But as the years went by, those feelings only grew stronger, deeper, until they became an ache that he carried with him every day. Jiwoo had resigned himself to loving Yena from afar, content to be part of her life in whatever way he could. He was there for the milestones and the quiet moments, the celebrations and the heartaches. He was the one who listened when she needed to talk, who made her laugh when she was feeling down, and who stood by her side through the ups and downs of her relationship with Minho. And through it all, he kept his love for her hidden, a secret that weighed on him, but that he could never bring himself to reveal. As time passed, Jiwoo began to notice the cracks in Minho and Yena's relationship. What had once been effortless and joyful now seemed strained, the silences between them growing longer, their smiles more forced. Jiwoo tried to ignore it, tried to convince himself that it wasn't his place to get involved. But deep down, he knew that something had changed, that the foundation of their relationship was crumbling beneath the surface. On that snowy evening, as Jiwoo stood on the rooftop of the cafe, lost in his thoughts, the soft chime of the cafe door broke through his reverie. He turned and saw her standing there, framed by the warm glow of the cafe's interior. She was wrapped in a camel-colored coat, her dark hair dusted with tiny flakes of snow, and there was a weariness in her eyes that hadn't been there before. It was a weariness that spoke of heartache and struggle, of burdens carried for too long. Yena moved through the cafe with a quiet grace, her gaze drifting over the shelves lined with books, a faint, wistful smile touching her lips. There was something tentative in the way she stood, as if she had come seeking refuge from a storm she could no longer withstand. Jiwoo watched her, his heart tightening in his chest. He wanted to go to her, to ask her what was wrong, but he hesitated, unsure of what to say. As the evening wore on, they found themselves sitting together by the window, the snow continuing to fall outside, blurring the edges of the world. The air between them was thick with unspoken words, with the weight of years and the longing that neither of them had ever acknowledged. Yena's expression was contemplative, her gaze distant, as if she were lost in memories. When she finally spoke, her voice was quiet, almost hesitant. She told Jiwoo that her marriage to Minho was ending. They were getting divorced. The finality of it hung between them, a quiet acknowledgement of something that had been unraveling for years. Jiwoo's heart tightened, not from surprise. He had long sensed the distance between them, but from the pang of guilt that followed. He had loved her from the shadows, and now, hearing the end of her story with Minho felt like bearing witness to a chapter he had unwittingly been a part of. Yena's words came slowly, as if each one was a struggle. She spoke of the slow disintegration of her marriage, of how she and Minho had once been happy, once laughed together, made plans together, and lived effortlessly until it all became a script, one they were too afraid to rewrite. She described how they had drifted apart, how the silences between them had grown heavier, and how the love they had once shared had slowly faded away. As Jiwoo listened, he felt a surge of conflicting emotions. He felt sorrow for Yena, for the pain she had endured, for the dreams that had crumbled. He felt guilt for the part of him that was relieved, that saw in her words the faint glimmer of hope that he had never allowed himself to acknowledge. And he felt fear of what her confession might mean, of what it might change. Before they could delve deeper into the fragile possibilities forming between them, the door to the cafe swung open once more, bringing a rush of cold air and an unexpected visitor. Minho stood at the entrance, his gaze flicking between Jiwoo and Yena. There was no anger in his eyes, only weariness, the quiet resignation of a man who had already let go. The moment was fraught with tension, but Minho's demeanor remained calm. He had come to talk, to finally confront the truths they had all been avoiding. Yena hesitated, glancing at Jiwoo before following Minho outside, leaving behind the warmth of the cafe and the uncertainty lingering in the air. Jiwoo watched them disappear into the snow, his mind swirling with questions he couldn't yet answer. That night, Jiwoo closed the cafe alone, his thoughts heavy with the weight of what had been left unsaid. He stood by the window, staring out at the quiet streets, wondering what the future held. Could years of missed chances and unspoken love truly be rewritten? Or was he destined to remain on the sidelines, forever watching from a distance? The winter days stretched on, each one folding softly into the next as Jiwoo and Yena began to navigate their newfound reality. Their shared moments in the cafe grew longer, and their connection deepened in ways that neither of them had quite expected. There was something about the quiet comfort they found in each other that felt as natural as breathing. The weight of past choices and regrets gradually began to dissolve, leaving room for something new to take root. Jiwoo spent his mornings opening the cafe, savoring the stillness that came before the first customers trickled in. The aroma of freshly brewed coffee filled the air, mingling with the faint scent of old books that lined the shelves. It was a small, tucked-away world, a refuge from the chaos of the city outside. And now, it had become the backdrop to this tentative chapter in his life, a chapter where Yena's presence was beginning to feel like an essential part of his days. Yena, too, seemed to be finding her footing. There was a subtle change in her demeanor, a lightness that hadn't been there before. She spent hours curled up in one of the corner armchairs, a book resting on her lap as she occasionally glanced out the window, watching the world go by. Sometimes Jiwoo would catch her eye, and they would exchange quiet smiles that spoke volumes. It was in those unspoken moments that he felt the depth of what was unfolding between them. Outside the cafe, the city pulsed with life, its streets bustling with people hurrying through the cold. The riverbanks were lined with bare trees, their branches etched against the pale winter sky. Jiwoo and Yena often took walks along the Han River, their footsteps crunching softly against the snow-covered path. They didn't need words to fill the silence between them. The quiet presence of the other was enough. As they walked, Jiwoo found himself thinking about how far they had come and how the paths that had once seemed so divergent had somehow led them back to each other. Yet, despite the growing closeness, there were still moments of uncertainty. Jiwoo occasionally found himself wrestling with lingering doubts and questions about whether it was truly possible to move forward without being weighed down by the past. He wondered if Yena felt the same, if the echoes of her life with Minho still haunted her in ways she hadn't shared. But he didn't press her. He knew that healing took time, and he was willing to wait. One afternoon, as a light snow began to fall outside, Jiwoo decided to close the cafe early. The streets were quiet, and a soft blanket of snow was already beginning to cover the sidewalks. As he turned the key in the lock, he felt a sense of contentment that had been elusive for so long. This, he realized, was what he had been searching for, a sense of peace, of belonging. Yenna arrived a little while later, her cheeks flushed from the cold. They spent the evening in the cafe, sharing a quiet meal by the window. The snow continued to fall outside, casting a soft glow over the city. There was a sense of stillness in the air, as though the world had paused just for them. Jiwoo found himself watching Yenna as she sipped her tea, marveling at the quiet strength she carried within her. She had been through so much, and yet she had emerged on the other side with grace and resilience. As the days passed, Jiwoo and Yenna began to settle into a rhythm. They fell into the kind of easy companionship that came from years of knowing each other. Yet there was also a sense of newness to their connection, a feeling of discovery, as though they were seeing each other through fresh eyes. They spent long evenings talking about their dreams and aspirations, about the things that had shaped them, and the lessons they had learned along the way. Yenna spoke of her childhood, of the memories that had left an indelible mark on her soul. She shared stories of the summers she had spent by the sea and of the nights she had stayed up late reading by flashlight under the covers. Jiwoo listened intently, savoring each detail, each glimpse into the world that had shaped her. In turn, he opened up about his own past, the moments of joy and heartbreak that had defined him, and the dreams he had once held close but had slowly let go of over the years. Through these shared stories, they began to understand each other on a deeper level. They discovered common threads in their experiences, small connections that had always been there, waiting to be uncovered. It was in these quiet moments of vulnerability that their bond grew stronger, weaving together the fragments of their pasts into something new and whole. But even as their connection deepened, there were moments when the past crept in, uninvited. Jiwoo occasionally caught glimpses of Yenna lost in thought, her gaze distant and unreadable. He knew that healing wasn't a linear process, that there were bound to be moments of doubt and hesitation, and so he gave her space when she needed it, trusting that she would come to him when she was ready. One evening, as they walked along the riverbank, Yenna suddenly stopped and turned to face Jiwoo. There was a vulnerability in her eyes, a flicker of uncertainty that tugged at his heart. Without speaking, she reached for his hand, lacing her fingers through his. It was a simple gesture, but it carried with it a profound sense of trust. At that moment, Jiwoo knew that they were both choosing to move forward together. As winter gradually gave way to spring, the city began to awaken from its slumber. The streets grew livelier, and the first blossoms appeared on the trees lining the riverbanks. The cafe, too, seemed to come alive with the changing season. Customers lingered a little longer, savoring the warmth of the sun streaming through the windows. Jiwoo and Yenna continued to navigate this new chapter, their connection growing stronger with each passing day. There were moments of quiet joy, afternoons spent browsing through secondhand bookstores, and evenings spent cooking together in Jiwoo's small kitchen. They found happiness in the simple, everyday moments, in the shared laughter and stolen glances that spoke of a love that was steady and enduring. But beneath the surface, there were still questions that lingered, questions about the future, about what lay ahead for them. Jiwoo occasionally found himself wondering if they could truly leave the past behind, if the wounds they carried would eventually heal. He knew that love alone wasn't always enough, that it took effort and patience to build something lasting. And yet, he was willing to put in the work because he knew that what they had was worth fighting for. One sunny afternoon, as they sat together on a park bench overlooking the river, Jiwoo found himself reflecting on how much had changed in such a short time. There was a sense of contentment in his heart, a quiet certainty that he hadn't felt in years. He glanced at Yenna, who was watching a group of children playing nearby, and felt a surge of gratitude for the journey that had brought them to this moment. As the days turned into weeks, Jiwoo and Yenna continued to build their life together, one day at a time. They faced challenges and uncertainties, but they also found strength in each other, in the love that had quietly grown between them. They learned to navigate the complexities of their past, to embrace the present, and to dream about the future. In the end, it wasn't the grand gestures or dramatic declarations that defined their love. It was the quiet moments, the unspoken understanding, and the steady presence of each other through the ups and downs of life. It was in those moments that they found their greatest joy, their deepest sense of belonging. And as they walked hand in hand along the riverbank, beneath a sky painted with the soft hues of dusk, Jiwoo knew that they had finally found their way home. The winter days drifted by in a serene quiet as Jiwoo and Yena continued to navigate their newfound relationship. It was as though time had slowed, allowing them to savor each moment, to rebuild what had been lost, and to create something new. The snow continued to blanket the streets, muffling the city sounds and painting the world in a soft, ethereal glow. Their lives, once marked by hesitation and missed chances, began to bloom in the quiet corners of the book cafe and in the silent beauty of the frozen world outside. Jiwoo had always been a person of quiet routines. He found comfort in the familiar rhythm of opening the cafe in the morning, arranging the books, and brewing the first pot of coffee. But now, those routines hold a new meaning. Each day brought something different. A shared glance, a fleeting touch, a subtle change in Yena's expression that spoke of unspoken emotions. Their bond deepened in these quiet exchanges, in the way their lives intertwined without the need for words. Yena had begun to spend more time at the cafe, her presence a steady comfort to Jiwoo. She often sat by the window, watching the snow fall as she flipped through books or scribbled in her notebook. There was a peacefulness about her that hadn't been there before, a quiet contentment that seemed to grow with each passing day. She no longer carried the weight of unspoken regrets or unresolved feelings. Instead, she seemed lighter, freer, like someone who had finally found her place in the world. Their days were filled with small, meaningful moments. Jiwoo would bring her a cup of coffee without being asked, and Yena would smile in that way that made his heart ache with quiet joy. They would sit together after closing, sharing stories from their past, laughing at memories that once seemed distant and unreachable. There was an intimacy in these moments that felt natural, as though they had always been meant to find their way to each other. Outside the cafe, the city moved on, oblivious to the quiet love story unfolding within its streets. The winter festivals brought bursts of color and light to the snowy landscape, and Jiwoo and Yena often found themselves wandering through the bustling markets, hand in hand. They would pause to admire the intricate ice sculptures, their breath mingling in the cold air as they marveled at the beauty of the frozen creations. It was during these walks that Jiwoo realized just how much his life had changed, and how much brighter the world seemed now that Yena was by his side. But even as their relationship deepened, there were moments of uncertainty, shadows of the past that lingered at the edges of their happiness. Jiwoo sometimes found himself wondering if their love was strong enough to withstand the weight of their history. He knew that Yena had loved Minho once, and though that love had faded, it had left behind scars that might never fully heal. There were times when he caught her gazing out the window with a distant look in her eyes, and he couldn't help but wonder what she was thinking. Yena, too, grappled with her own doubts. She had spent so many years suppressing her feelings for Jiwoo, convincing herself that their love was impossible, that it was something she could never have. Now that it was real, she sometimes felt overwhelmed by the intensity of her emotions. She worried that she might hurt Jiwoo, that the baggage of her past might pull them apart. But every time she looked into his eyes, she saw the quiet strength and unwavering love that had always been there, and her fears began to fade. As the weeks passed, Jiwoo and Yena found themselves falling into a new rhythm, a rhythm that was uniquely theirs. They began to dream about the future, tentatively at first, and then with growing confidence. They talked about expanding the cafe, about turning it into a space where people could gather for poetry readings, art exhibitions, and intimate concerts. It was a shared vision that brought them even closer together, a reminder that they were building something not just for themselves, but for the community around them. One afternoon, as they were reorganizing the shelves, Jiwoo came across an old photo tucked between the pages of a forgotten book. It was a picture of him, Yena, and Minho taken during their college days. They were standing on the steps of the university library, laughing at something out of frame. Jiwoo felt a pang of nostalgia as he stared at the photo, remembering the carefree days when everything had seemed so simple. But as he glanced at Yena, who was carefully arranging a stack of books nearby, he realized that he wouldn't trade their present for anything. That evening, as they closed up the cafe, Jiwoo suggested that they visit the old university campus. Yena agreed, and they set off through the snowy streets, their footsteps crunching softly beneath them. The campus was quiet, its grand stone buildings shrouded in darkness. They wandered through the empty courtyards, reminiscing about their time as students, the late-night study sessions, the impromptu adventures, and the dreams they had once held. As they stood beneath the towering oak tree where they had spent countless afternoons, Jiwoo felt a surge of emotion. This was the place where he had first realized that he loved Yena, where he had watched her laugh and felt his heart ache with unspoken longing. Now, years later, they were back in the same spot, but everything had changed. He reached for her hand, and she squeezed it gently, as though she understood exactly what he was feeling. Their visit to the campus marked a turning point in their relationship. It was a reminder of how far they had come, of the obstacles they had overcome to be together. They began to talk more openly about their past, sharing the fears and insecurities that had once held them back. Jiwoo told Yena about the years he had spent loving her from a distance, and she confessed that she had always sensed his feelings, even when she tried to ignore them. These conversations brought them even closer, deepening their understanding of each other and strengthening their bond. As winter gradually gave way to spring, the city began to thaw, and so did Jiwoo and Yena's hearts. They started to make plans for the future in earnest, sketching out ideas for the cafe and brainstorming ways to bring their vision to life. They enlisted the help of friends and local artists, transforming the space into a vibrant hub of creativity and community. The cafe became a place where people could gather to share stories, to express themselves, and to connect. And at the center of it all were Jiwoo and Yena, their love, a quiet, steady presence that radiated warmth and hope. One evening, as they sat on the rooftop terrace, watching the sun set over the city, Jiwoo reflected on how much his life had changed. He had spent so many years hiding his feelings, afraid of what might happen if he let them show. But now he realized that love was not something to be feared. It was something to be embraced, to be nurtured, to be celebrated. And with Yena by his side, he felt ready to face whatever the future held. As the sky darkened and the stars began to emerge, Jiwoo and Yena sat in comfortable silence, their hands entwined. They had come a long way from the days of unspoken longing and missed chances. Their journey had been marked by pain and uncertainty, but it had also been filled with moments of beauty and joy. And now, as they looked out over the city they called home, they knew that their story was just beginning and that the best was yet to come. In the quiet stillness of the night, Jiwoo and Yena found peace in each other's presence. They had weathered the storms of their past, and now they stood on the threshold of a new chapter, a chapter filled with hope, with possibility, with love. And as they sat together beneath the starry sky, they knew that no matter what challenges lay ahead, they would face them together, as partners, as equals, as soulmates. The days grew warmer, signaling the end of winter and the slow arrival of spring. Jiwoo and Yena's life together was beginning to take on a quiet rhythm, the kind that unfolded naturally, with no need for pretense or forced effort. They moved forward like two threads that had finally found their way back to the same pattern, weaving something new and beautiful. Each moment, each shared glance, felt like a small triumph, a testament to the years they had spent apart and the courage it had taken to finally come together. As the ice melted from the streets, they spent more time outdoors, wandering through markets and parks, savoring the changing seasons. Their connection, once weighed down by memories of the past, grew lighter with each day. Jiwoo noticed the subtle shifts in Yena, the way she smiled more easily, how her laughter rang out without hesitation, and how her shoulders, once tense with the burden of unspoken worries, had begun to relax. She was shedding the layers of her old life, and in their place, something softer and freer was emerging. In those quiet moments, Jiwoo reflected on how far they had come. There had been a time when he thought love was something he would never grasp, something meant only for others. But now, as he stood by Yena's side, he realized that love wasn't about grand gestures or perfect timing. It was about showing up, about being there when it mattered most, about holding space for each other's hopes and fears. And for the first time in his life, Jiwoo felt like he truly belonged. The spring days stretched into long, golden evenings. The cafe became a gathering place for friends and familiar faces, and Jiwoo found joy in the simple routines of his work. Yena often joined him there, bringing her own creative energy to the space. She had begun sketching again, her notebooks filled with drawings of the people and places that surrounded them. Her art, once an outlet for her unspoken longings, had transformed into a celebration of the life they were building together. But as the warmth of spring gave way to the heat of summer, new challenges began to emerge. Jiwoo and Yena both knew that love, no matter how deep or true, was not immune to the complexities of the world around them. There were moments of uncertainty, moments when old fears threatened to resurface. For Yena, it was the lingering shadow of her past with Minho, the nagging question of whether she had truly let go of all that had been. For Jiwoo, it was the fear that he might not be enough, that his quiet love might pale in comparison to the intensity of what Yena had once shared with Minho. They navigated these challenges in their own ways, sometimes stumbling, sometimes retreating into themselves, but always finding their way back to each other. Jiwoo learned to be patient, to listen without judgment, and to understand that healing was not a linear process. Yena, in turn, learned to trust to believe that she was worthy of the love Jiwoo offered so freely, without conditions or expectations. One afternoon, as they walked along the beach, Yena paused to watch the waves crashing against the shore. There was a restlessness in her gaze, a yearning that Jiwoo recognized all too well. She had always been a dreamer, always searching for something just beyond the horizon. And though Jiwoo's love had given her a sense of stability, there were still parts of her that longed for the freedom to explore, to create, to chase after the unknown. Jiwoo understood this about her, and he knew that loving Yena meant embracing all of her, even the parts that were still searching. He didn't try to hold her back. Instead, he encouraged her to follow her dreams, to pursue the art residency she had been considering in Europe. It wasn't an easy decision. Neither of them wanted to be apart, but they both knew it was something Yena needed to do. As Yena prepared for her departure, their days were filled with bittersweet moments. They cherished the time they had left, knowing that their love would be tested by the distance, but trusting that it would endure. Jiwoo watched as Yena packed her sketchbooks and brushes, her excitement tempered by the sadness of leaving him behind. He reminded her that this was not the end of their story, only the beginning of a new chapter. The day Yena left for the airport, the cafe felt unusually quiet. Jiwoo went through the motions of his work, but his thoughts kept drifting to her, wondering where she was, what she was feeling, and whether she missed him as much as he missed her. The distance was hard, but it also gave them both the space to grow, to rediscover who they were as individuals. In the months that followed, they kept in touch through letters, phone calls, and video chats. Yena shared stories of her travels, of the artists she met, and of the places that inspired her. Jiwoo, in turn, kept her updated on the cafe, on the familiar faces who asked after her, and on the quiet moments he spent thinking of her. Their love, though stretched across miles, remained strong, a steady flame that refused to waver. As the seasons changed once more, Jiwoo found himself reflecting on the journey that had brought him to this point. He thought of the boy he had been, the boy who had loved Yena from afar, too afraid to speak his heart. And he thought of the man he had become, the man who had finally found the courage to stand by her side, to love her not from a distance, but up close, with all the messy, beautiful imperfections that love entailed. When Yena finally returned, it was autumn again, the air crisp and cool, the leaves turning shades of gold and crimson. Jiwoo waited for her at the airport, his heart pounding with anticipation. As she walked through the arrival gates, their eyes met, and in that instant, everything else faded away. She was home. They embraced, holding on tightly as though to make up for all the time they had been apart. There were no words needed in that moment, only the quiet understanding that their love had endured, that they had found their way back to each other once more. In the days that followed, they settled back into their life together. Yena shared her sketches and stories, and Jiwoo listened with rapt attention, marveling at the way her eyes lit up as she described her adventures. Their love, once weighed down by unspoken fears and regrets, now felt lighter, freer, and unburdened by the past. As they walked hand in hand through the city, Jiwoo realized that their journey, though far from over, had brought them to a place of peace. They had faced the storms, weathered the distance, and come out stronger on the other side. And though life would continue to bring its share of challenges, they knew that they could face them together. In the quiet of their shared moments, Jiwoo and Yena found a love that was not defined by grand gestures or perfect timing, but by the simple act of choosing each other day after day. And as they stood together beneath the autumn sky, they knew that they had finally found their way home, not to a place, but to each other.